So please welcome Piero.
Thank you. Thank you, Vegard. Thank you for coming. Some of you from far away, and thank you for the invitation. It's always moving for me and emotive to come to Oslo. It's the fourth time I come to Oslo. I came before for business, but the first time I came to Oslo was with my father when I was 10 years old. He brought me on a business trip with him to Göteborg, and then we moved the E6 road all the way up to Oslo, and we spent a lot of time here. I remember visiting the Kon-Tiki Museum and so on. And of course, since my father died this year, it's always moving for me to remember how we came and how it was a great time. So that was in 1981 or 82, long time ago. So thank you very much, and it's always a pleasure to come here. So yes, I'm Swiss. I'm an author of different books. I also have a long career before that in the software industry as marketing and business development manager. So I've traveled about 100 countries across the world to develop business. And I've written 4 books, which I'm very lucky. They've been very successful, so hopefully they're not so bad. And yes, and I always start by saying, well, first of all, let me say what I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about the end of the world. I'm not talking about the Mayas. I'm not talking about apocalyptic events, and I'm certainly not talking about what they are talking in the movies, which is usually something that is entertaining and scary and spectacular, but sometimes reality is more interesting than fiction, and I'm going to talk about things that are more mundane and more realistic, I think. More importantly, that's the format problem when you move from Mac to PC. Let's hope it's not going to be this surprise all along. Okay, the important thing for me is that I'm trying, as much as I can, to tell you what I think is the truth, what I think is the reality. My whole reasoning is based on reason, on evidence, on facts, and of course on the logic that projects these facts in the future. And therefore, I try to be as realistic and as factual as possible. But for me, the most important, the first and if only one thing you need to come out of today is that, of course, reality can be seen from different angles. And therefore, the only important thing that you should remember from today is to think by yourselves, is to be independent in your thought. It's not to be an NPC, it's to be thinking really the way your reason and your evidence, and of course sometimes your instincts. And if you're here, it probably means that you have good instincts. So, first story. This is a small island. You have a lot of islands in Norway. It's a beautiful country, Norway. This is an island far away from here, across the pole, just across the pole, so it's not so far away. It's St. Matthews in between the eastern part of the Soviet Union, of Russia and Alaska. And this island is part of the American territory. During World War II, Americans feared that some planes or ships would sink or be destroyed by the Japanese, and if people were being stranded on this island, they needed to have food, because the island has no food. So they introduced in the island some reindeer. And of course the reindeer had no predators, and they started to eat, of course, the food, and they grew, and the population of reindeer grew exponentially, and they introduced 42 reindeer, and the population went up to 6,000 in 1963. And then suddenly something happened. There was a very cold winter, and there was no more food. Because there were no predators, there was no control on the population, and suddenly the population dropped because they tracked the numbers as in kind of the forestry services track the number. So this trend is what we call in biology an overshoot. Exponential growth, you reach the limits of the resources and you collapse. You overshoot, you collapse. This is typical. You can see it in biology, in the laboratory, you can see in animals, you can see it everywhere. This is how nature works about overpopulation. Now, if you compare that to, this is the growth of human population through the ages. We started as little monkeys in the trees, in the savannah somewhere. Eventually we evolved, but 10,000 years ago, when we had agriculture in the Middle East and we started to, really develop civilization, we were not a lot. In the year zero, in the year one, there was no year zero. We probably were about 100 million across the world. And when Napoleon, when General Bernadotte became king of Sweden, there was about 1 billion people in the world. 100 years ago, there was 2 billion in the world in 1914, something like that. 3 billion people in the 1940s. And when I was born, I'm old, but still it's recent, 71, we were probably 4.5, almost 5 billion, and now we're 8, and keep growing. This growth is exponential, and even if the percentage of growth yearly is actually decreasing, and we have transitions in many, many countries, this is a lot of people. And it's very recent because of modern medicine, because of modern technologies in food. And this trend should be, I think, in the first page of every newspaper, every newsreel, every day. Because this is a very worrisome trend. Now, it's worrisome because I'm not saying we're too many. I think we're too many. But I'm not saying that objectively we're too many, because by definition we are here, we are eating, so therefore there is resources. The question is, how long can we have resources and how much more can we go? This is the question. So we have to look at what kind of resources are available. And of course, the number one resource we should always look at, and in Norway is obviously something you know pretty well, it's obviously petrol, oil. Because that is how it provided us to be here, this is how we get our clothes, this is how you work, and so on. So probably I don't need to teach you a lot about how oil industry works, but let's say you have an oil field. Let's say it's called Ekofisk. And at some point you detect it, like in your case it was in the 70s, as you start to put up a system of exploitation, you start to get out the oil, and eventually, over time, because this is not infinite, eventually production starts to decrease. In fact, I believe that Ekofisk is starting to decrease in production in Norway for quite some time now. So this is pretty standard. Detection, setting up the extraction, and then it reduces over time, and then one day there is no more and you move to another field. So obviously you don't only have one field in the world, you have thousands and thousands and thousands of fields. And when you add them up, one after the other, what do you have? Well, you have a mathematical calculation which shows that eventually you grow, you reach a peak, and eventually you decrease over time. The question is, how much time? And the question is, how much do you have? And the question is, how fast are you getting it up, right? Makes sense. It's easy. There's no discussion about this. There's discussion about the time. There's discussion about how much it goes. But this is how it works. Now we can look at the past and look how different countries have developed their extraction, and you see that yes, for example, Middle East has a peak in 2010 and it's decreasing and so on. So we can start to see how it works. We can compare theory, this nice trajectory, with the reality, and you see that in reality you have ups and downs because sometimes you have geopolitical elements, effects. Crises, economic crisis. Suddenly, when there is economic crisis, you want less oil, so you produce less. So you have a bit of up and down, but generally speaking, you're starting to follow the same trend. So this is conventional oil. Oops, too fast. I believe that we have, I think the Norwegian ones. I went to dig, and I saw that indeed you've reached the peak in Norway already quite some time ago. But you're still producing some oil, so you're a rich country, of course. I don't know who's the sheikh, who's the emir of Norway, but I believe, yes, you have a king, so it must be quite rich. Well, the country is very rich for sure. So the question then is, okay, when are we going to reach the peak globally? And how many new discoveries do we make? So you take the data and you look at new discoveries, and you find that we have the peak discoveries in 1964. We are discovering less and less oil every year. Because sometimes you see in the news, people say, oh, incredible new oil field discovered in Senegal. And people send me emails saying, oh no, we will have oil forever because we found these huge oil fields. And I say, okay, what is a huge oil field? I say, well, there's 2 billion barrels. Okay, 2 billion barrels. Now the human consumption is about 100 per day. So 2 billion is about 20 days, 40 days, 40 days. So yeah, that's not that big. Yeah, it is big, but we consume like crazy. We consume a lot. So we have to check how much are we discovering. So I updated my slide, and we see that we are producing really, if you take all oil, peak discovery 1964, 1985 production and peak discovery starts to decrease, and this is all oils together. We start to have a significant decrease. And in fact, the only countries in the world that have extra production in right now is Iraq, because they were producing less for the last 20 years, really. And in the United States, because they have these new technologies that allows them to get extraction out of fracking and out of horizontal oil fields. So I want to take a second concept that I want to dig. This picture shows a nugget of copper. So a long time ago, when you wanted copper to do telegraph cables, which is the same as electric cables really, you wanted copper. So you go and dig, and this is somewhere in America, I think it's Nebraska or somewhere, where you dig a mountain where you have strong ores of copper, and you find a piece of copper, and then you cut it down, you smelt it, and you make your copper. Now today, to find copper, this is what you need to do. You need to dig the mountain up, and instead of finding big chunks of copper, you have tons of soil that you need to treatment, and you need to put into chemicals and into water. And maybe out of 1 ton of soil, you get 1 kilo of copper. And this is considered very, very good. And this is what they have. This is, I think, a mine in Chile. And I worked myself to sell stuff, to sell computer systems in mines in Zambia. And I can tell you the size of the soil and the incredible amount of work to get copper, which is fundamental metal for all electricity, is incredibly, it's gigantic. And you see the little cars there. The little cars are really enormous. And it's the same for oil. In the beginning, you make a little digging in the ground in Saudi Arabia, and poof, there's a lot of oil coming out. You just put some tubes, you refine it, easy. Today, of course, it's becoming more complicated. You also need to dig up tars, and of course, what you do in Norway, going and seek oil in the sea, is expensive. It's complicated. It's a high technology that is required for that. And these trucks are very big, so you have to think of how much the truck is using in terms of energy of oil, because they don't work. They're not hybrid and they're not solar. You need energy out of. You need oil to run the trucks and the machines that will get you oil. So here's an interesting question: is how much? And let's say economists will say, the more it's hard to get oil, the more the price will go up. Sure. And they say, therefore, we will always have oil, but it will be more expensive. But that's not how it works. Sure, the logic is that, but the reality is that once you have 1 barrel of oil that you need to spend to run your machines and to manufacture the machines, to get 1 barrel of oil, even if the price of oil is $1 billion per barrel, it doesn't matter, because you used it to get it. So it makes no sense. It's like hunters. If you need to feed yourself with hunting and you consume 3,000 calories running down the mountain to shoot a food that will provide you only 2,000 calories, you die eventually, because you spend too much energy to get energy. So this is a concept that often they don't explain to us, and it's a very important concept: the energy required on energy invested. And this ratio has to be positive. And what we see is that 100 years ago, that ratio was basically 91 to 1, 99 to 1, and today the ratio is becoming very low and it's dropping, and it's roughly today about 10 to 1, and when you get to 1 to 1, it's over. And this is important. Now, another objection, which is true, that people will say, okay, we can dig oil in a different way. We have better technology to go and take I don't know the translation of schist in English, but you can find these. You can frack and with hot water and chemicals, you can destroy some rocks, and in the rocks you will have more oil that you can get. And it's true, it works, and we've been lucky that we probably gained 10 years in the 2010s. Without this, we would have already all the problems that I'm going to talk about. So we are getting a little bit more oil, and in fact, what we see is starting 2005, mostly 2010, we've had a growth of this fracking, but it's also complicated and it starts to drop also very, very fast. So there is a limit of how much new energy it provided us. So the reality is that we're getting quite soon to a point where we'll have much, much less inexpensive oil. We will probably always have oil, but it's going to be complicated to get and expensive. Now, here's another issue, is that we keep growing, and we keep wanting our economies to grow, especially developing countries. China, India, and in some ways also Africa and so on, keep growing. They consume more and more energy, and most of that energy has to come from oil, because oil is a fantastic energy, easy to manage. Anyone can fill a car with petrol, whereas if you do it with hydrogen, it's a bit more complicated and so on. So it's a fantastic energy, and you start to see that the demand is still very high. Even when there was crisis in the past, we forecast that demand for oil keeps growing. This is a growth. So the growth is still very positive. And so the question that you have to ask yourself, it's another logical thought, is that over time, if you have zero consumption to 100% consumption of the resources, and if you have exponential growth, at what time are you reaching the peak? Remember that peak? That was one way you can see the graph of the consumption. Another way is you turn it around and you see the growth of consumption. Well, half is this line, right? 0 to 100, half is this line. And when you cross any exponential growth with half, well, it's very near the end, because exponential growth is exponential, and human mind has very difficult. It's a very difficult concept, because nothing in nature is exponential. We grow linearly, almost linearly, and we don't grow like this. So this is very important. It means that once you reach the peak of production and it starts to decrease, if demand keeps being exponential, which it is, very quickly you hit a wall. The wall is not necessarily when you're 100%, of course, but the wall comes very fast. So we are very near this point. Maybe it's next year, maybe it's 5 years from now, maybe it's 10 years from now, but the wall is very, very near. It's not 100 years from now. It's not 50 years from now. It's very near. The problem is, of course, countries who produce a little bit of, let's say Norway, I don't know how many million of barrels you produce per day. 5, 2, can't remember exactly. Let's say it's 2 billion barrels per day. And let's say you consume 1 million barrels per day for your own life in Norway, for your shipping, for your fishing, for your transports. Let's say your consumption drops from 2 to 1. You cannot export anymore, so you start to have economic budget problems for your government, for the funds. And let's say that people who are buying from you, of course they're not buying you anymore, because you have the choice now. Are you going to export, or are you going to keep it for yourself? If you export what you're making and you don't give it to the economy locally, well, people are going to have big problems. So you will keep it for you. So it could be that countries that have no oil will have problems before we are reaching the point where we have overall lacking of the resource. Because then you will have, I don't know, Egypt, indeed, I took the example of Norway, but maybe Saudi or Nigeria, who stop exporting because they need to keep their population happy. Because otherwise you have revolt, you have people who cannot have jobs, and maybe the food is not happening. So you can have a crisis much before there is a real lack of production. So that was oil, and I could do the same 5-minute presentation on every other type of resources: aluminium, iron, silver, rare earth is even more. We can talk about uranium. We can talk about production of everything is following the same trend. We are consuming an enormous amounts of resources, of materials, and the earth is not infinite. There are limits, and we cannot grow in an infinite way with limited resources. So we are depleting the resources that exist. And what's interesting to see is oil, of course, it's useful, but you cannot eat it. But it's useful to produce the food that we eat. Because today, agriculture, we talked it earlier today in an interview, farmers are not little garden farmers. Farmers are industrialists today. They are traders. They sell their productions on international markets. And the way you grow food today is extremely industrialized and mechanized. So how are we going to keep going if there is less energy for these matters? And in fact, what we're seeing today is that water is also becoming scarce. In the red in this graph, you see that the areas of the world where there is the problems with water, there is not enough water to grow the food, because you can pump oil for machines, but then you also need the water to grow food. And obviously you see that we have problems with water in the places in the world that have the most population growth. So, big problem. And it's a little bit where you have the instability today in the world. Take, for example, Egypt. I was discussing 2 weeks ago with an Egyptian guy. They have reached 100 million people living in Egypt. 100 million people on this little piece of land, which is probably half the size of Switzerland. And he was saying, oh, we're going to grow more cities in the desert. I said, okay, you can build cities in the desert, but where is still your food? I'm saying, oh, we need to produce the food in the delta. And I say, okay, so you have to be careful where you walk, because how are you going to find the space and where's what and water? And so, oh, we find water because we have the Nile River. So yes, but you're not the only ones to have the Nile River, because now Ethiopia, Sudan, and Uganda, they want to develop also a lot of agriculture, and extensive agriculture. So they need a lot of water. And so they are going to pump it from the rains and from the Nile River where it starts. So there's going to be less and less water for Egypt. And rivers sometimes go dry, like the Colorado River, which is a huge river. Now it's not going to the Pacific anymore. It's pumped so much by Mexican and Californian agriculture that it's not going to the sea anymore. So there's going to be war between Egypt and Sudan and Ethiopia, because you need the water. Same in Kashmir. Kashmir in India, they don't just fight for having a nice mountain area. They fight because this is where the rivers of Pakistan start. They all start from the glaciers and the mountains in Kashmir, in the Hindu Kush. And I cannot even say there's going to be war. There's been war for the last 40 years. Most of the water in Israel and Palestine is under the Palestinian lands. Under Gaza, that's where the aquifers are, and under the mountains, of course, of Galilee and the central part of the country. You think they're going to give away the land which has most of the water? No way. There's never going to be peace until you have the problems of the water sorted, and it's not going to be sorted. So there's going to be conflict all the time. And worse than that, even if you have water and even if you have oil to keep the machinery, the problem is the extensive agriculture techniques of today, they're destroying the earth, they're destroying the land. And you see all the lands that have depletion of resources, because if you do monoculture all the way, erosion destroys the earth, and because you have monoculture and because you use pesticides and chemicals, you destroy the little microscopic animals that are feeding and transforming the land into something fertile. So you're in fact desertifying the lands. And once it's the desert, nothing can grow for a long, long time. And of course, there's more and more people. And there's more and more people who want to live not like a farmer in Mali, A lot more people want to live like Chinese, and the Chinese want to live like Europeans, and the Europeans we are sold the American way of life. Therefore, everyone wants more, wants to have more food, more gadgets, more resources. So it's going to be very difficult. And another aspect of that is the dark side of consumption is the waste. All now it's Christmas season. It's horrible I hate it because you have so much stuff that you throw away, all these plastic bags and the stuff you put in the garbage. It's crazy. And as I worked in Africa, I've seen where all of this goes. Most of the garbage that we have, the electronics, from electronics to ships, they end up in India and in Africa, and they are dismantled over there, and there's toxic stuff going in the nature, in the fields, in the water. It's a huge, huge destruction of ecosystems. And it's like this everywhere. In some countries, in some times of the year, you cannot even breathe in the cities. It's becoming very toxic and dangerous for health. And of course, we're destroying and the habitats where we are feeding ourselves. And of course, being a big fishing country, Norway knows what is the problem of overfishing. If you overfish places in the sea, unless it's well managed, which I'm sure you do, but not everyone does that, then you have less fish, and it's the same in the lands. If you over-destroy the forests, you have the problems of killing the habitats for the food, for the animals, and therefore the food chain on which we are today at the top. We have not always been at the top. The cats are on the top, but we are below. But still, it's important for us. Now, for example, I used to work a long time ago for a Swedish company that had some immense forests to make matches. Now, they know how to do, every year they cut, I don't know how many acres of wood, so they plant just as many acres of wood, so that there is, over 20 years, there is enough renewal. But in many countries, you don't do that. They just burn and cut and move to another land because it's so cheap, there's no regulations, there's corruption. So we are destroying habitats all over the world. And this is a major problem, where when you destroy the ecosystems and the habitats, the number of species fall down. And today we have problems with the bees as well. So once again, if you turn the earth into a desert, there is a problem for food. So, I'm not even talking about global warming. I don't know if it's true. First of all, I don't trust the people who tell us whether it's true or not. But I don't know. What I know is that we're killing, because I've seen it myself, we're killing habitats all over the world. And what I know, because I've been there, I've seen that when you destroy habitats and when you start to have hunger and famine and overpopulation, well, people start to be hungry, and they start to fight for resources, and they start to be indoctrinated by crazy ideologies, and then they want to move. And more of them. And more of them. And we are just at the start of this process. And when I was saying this 10 years ago, people were saying, no, but, Africa is growing. Yeah, it's growing 3 to 4% a year, but the population is growing 5 to 6% a year. So the extra growth is going to go somewhere, because you can't provide 1 million jobs in Nigeria every year, new jobs for new people. Can't. 100 million people in Egypt. What are they going to do what are they doing? There's no 100 million jobs in Egypt. So it's going to export. So what politicians tell us is they say, don't worry, we're going to grow. And where growth is going to bring money, and money will enable us to pay for whatever problem is going to happen. Okay? But without resources, I don't think there's going to be growth. And yet, I'm wrong. The facts show that I'm wrong. There has been growth. For the last 30 years, there's been a lot of growth. But it's not real growth. It's growth made with debt. We've created money out of nowhere through the creation of money, which is creation of debt. And so we could fund and finance more growth. So we are eating more and more resources, but we're accelerating this out of fantasy, which is money. Because money is just an agreement between people. There's no real basis, especially when you create it in a proportion that has no link and no relationship with real value that has been created. So most of the countries in the world, the red are the countries which have the most debt. And if you take, for example, the biggest country or the biggest economy in the world today, China is about to take it over for sure, but it's still the United States that has the most influence. And you see that the debt is also going exponential. And when I started this presentation, it was $14 trillion, and now it's about $21 to $23 trillion. And this is just the step. This is just the debt of the government. The total debt is much bigger. So today we talk about trillions. Do we even know what a trillion means? You know, a trillion is 1,000 billion. And you know, what's the distance from here to the airport in kilometers? 50 kilometers? 60? If you take $100 and you stack it up, the pile to get 1 trillion is about 60 kilometers if you pile it up. So it's difficult for us to understand what is this money. And this money is created. It's created like crazy every year. And the debt is just keeping growing. And in the past, debt was created when there was war, which is not economically sound, but you do it because you want to win the war, because being invaded by someone else is less economic sound than creating money. But eventually you go back to some levels that are manageable. But when there's been a war in the last 40 years, no war? Well, at least not in the soil of America, and they've created all this money. And we understand the mechanics. After going away from the gold standard in '71, they just created more and more money to fund whatever needs that the US government had. But this money is created against what kind of reality asset? None. Because the debt has been multiplied by 3, but you don't have 3 times more airports, harbors, economics, prosperity. In fact, the people in America and elsewhere, they don't see an increase of their prosperity per capita. So obviously we've been talking for many years of the debt per inhabitant. So this is something that, by the way, the migrants who come to Europe, they don't know, is that when they get into France, they owe us $30,000 day one. So that's the bad news. The good news is the even worse news is that no one is going to pay it anyway. So when you pile up the debt from the government, the debt from the people, the credit cards, the student loans, you get to levels of debt which are, so the public is probably 50 trillion. But if you add all the debt, today you're probably about 400 trillion. So this is 100 times the GDP of the United States. Impossible to reimburse this. Can you imagine if you make 100,000, I don't know, let's say you make 800,000 kroner per year, but your debt is 80 million. Can't make it. Or actually I made my calculation wrong now that I think of it. Your debt is 4 times or 5 times more or 100 times more. You just can't make it. You can never reimburse it. So it's a scam. No one will ever pay this. It will have to collapse. And it always collapses, because in history this is not new. Using debt, using fake money to pay for your expenses is something that the Romans used to do. It's something that has been done all the time by bad managers, and exactly, and it creates a problem. So the first step is that the bank starts to, like they did in Cyprus, and they will do more and more. They start to influence for laws that are going to allow them to take the money from your bank accounts, from our bank accounts. So today the bank robbers are the banks, which is quite funny. The other element is that they say, don't worry, the growth will happen. But I should say that we have enough stuff. So I don't know where we're going to bring more consumption, more growth. But for sure, what we're already seeing is that starting in America, despite the good numbers in the last few years, which seem to be correct, even if they are a bit optimistic, we have people upset in the street. We have people lining up like in 1929. And of course, the problem is when you create a lot of money, sooner or later, and I tell you, honestly, I thought it would have been sooner, you have problems of hyperinflation, like Germany in the 1920s, like in Yugoslavia in the early 90s. And I lived in Zimbabwe and I've seen this. This was 100 billion, no, 1, 2, 3, this was 10 billion Zimbabwean dollars. Anyway, no one counted. You paid by weight. Say one kilo of bread was 1 kilo of $10 trillion bank. Anyway, so you will have one day the hyperinflation in Europe and in America for sure. It has to be, and in Switzerland, because we have also created money like crazy. Now, making a fire with your banknotes is something, but the problem is it doesn't stop there. Every time you have a major economic and financial crisis, like in the 1770s in France, you end up with revolution. There was a crisis, big crisis that no one is teaching us at school, but there was a big crisis in 1907 and it was followed by World War I. There was a big crisis in 1929 and it was followed, of course, by the destruction of World War II. Now, when America was the winner of World War II, really, economically they won, they funded and they fed everyone. This is what Europe looked like after, well, not here, you were lucky. But of course, for America, it was great. You know, in the 50s and the 60s, you had to build everything, and a lot of European countries had to work a lot, and there was a lot of work you had to build, so you could start a healthy economy. But, and this is where the American dream came on. You know, everyone wanted to have a little house, two cars, 2 children, a little dog, and a small castle, which we call a small house. You know, and this is where it started. And but the problem is very quickly, and there was Korean War. Very quickly, America was facing a problem. How, you know, this economy can only work if you have a war and then recovery, war and then recovery, economic crisis, war, recovery, economic crisis, war, recovery. And starting with Vietnam, they spent all their budget, and they started to go on debt. This is why in '71, in the middle of the Vietnam War, they removed the gold because they had no more gold. They had to spend it all. And so the idea was to say, well, maybe we can have war all the time, but elsewhere, so that we keep this machine of war going. And this is why, in fact, from the 70s, they started to move the focus to the Middle East, where conveniently there are a lot of oil resources that one can control. So they started to make alliances with Iran and with other countries, especially Saudi and Israel, whereas before they were not so much interested in the Middle East. And indeed, we all remember the 90s. I remember when the first war against Iraq, and in fact we see that while the wars have decreased, we are starting to have an increase anymore of small wars again. And this is an interesting trend, because sometimes people say, "Oh, but the world is more peaceful now than it was in the 60s and the 70s." It's true. It's true, but it's picking up. And this is, I have to look at trends. And when you look at trends, you have to see something is happening now. In the last 10 years, something new is happening. It's a bad trend. It's not a good one. So we all, if you're young here, but I remember very well in the early 2000s, in fact, I was in the street protesting at some point against the war. And then I figure out, if you're a big country like America, and you have a lot of debt, and the only thing you have is a war machine, if that's the only tool you have, you're going to use it. And indeed, it's now what, 17 years after September 11 that it's been used to go to war constantly all the time in many countries across the world. Well, they have bases in Norway. You are an occupied country, of course, like Italy, like many other countries in Europe, like Turkey, like Greece. And this is the point when I started to think all of what I'm doing today is starting this day. When I saw Colin Powell lying in front of the United States, of the United Nations. Okay, everyone lies at the United Nations, but saying this is the proof that Iraq has a weapon of mass destruction. And by the way, they did 9/11, and I was like, no, they didn't do a 9/11. No one did 9/11, and suddenly lying about something so obvious as going to war. I said, wow, what else have they lied to me about history in the past? Because I'm a big fan of history. So I started to dig, I started to look at what were the big lies that have been told in the history. And I found out that we always go to war when there is a problem in the economy. And to go to war, you need an enemy, you need the bad guy. So 150 years ago already, they had the bad guys, the Muslims in Sudan, that Britain, which was the empire at the time, really had to go and fight. And then there was the bad guy in Mexico, and then there was the bad guy in Germany, and then there was another bad guy in Africa, and then there was another bad guy Germany, and then another one in Russia, and in China, and so on, and so on, and so on. We need the bad guys that the media push up to push us to war all the time. And it works. Because the media want to push for war. They're not independent, or not many of them. And the more we go, the more we find this trend to go to fight, to go to war, because that's the way you take the people away from the economic problems to something else which is more dangerous. Now, of course, the big difference today is that obviously bringing democracy across the world that looks like that and that creates all these problems, with much more expensive military forces in the world, it's very expensive today. So I think these are Spanish, UK, all these are in Iraq and Afghanistan. Even the Germans, they sent the Germans to war. It's dangerous. The Koreans, Norway, you are even Norway. What are you doing in Iraq or Afghanistan or places like that? I mean, I'm sure, okay, you need training, but why? And then you have deaths in the population. 1.5 million people killed in Iraq in 17 years. That's, And of course, the moral, we forget this. But in the rest of the world, they don't. I'm sure they don't like what we did to them. So this is a problem. And democracy, before and after, this is Iraq. I think this is also Iraq, and this is Afghanistan, before and after, Libya, before and after, before Syria, where we've been, before and after. This is Aleppo, it was a beautiful market. They remember this. They hate us, and they're right. We've destroyed their countries. We, not me, not you, but we are part of the economy and the system that's creating this. It's a disaster. And you have generation, in Iraq it's from 91. It's 30 years, almost 30 years that they're under the bombs of America all the time. So it's 2 generations of people born hating us in a crazy way. And of course, we would do the same, imagine? And it's not working, by the way. It will not bring democracy. And it's a disaster, to the point where when they wanted to go invade Syria, there was mutiny in the American army. And I remember people telling me, I'm not going. And they were totally telling their officers, look, I'm not gonna follow orders if we want to go to Syria. That was almost 10 years ago now. And so you cannot, at some point, you cannot go to every war because the people will not do it. Even today, if they say to soldiers in Europe, let's go to war against Russia, fuck no. No one will go. He says, I don't want to die. I don't want to be killed and frozen in the winter and nuked. No way. So there is a problem. And of course, to go to war, even if you need a pretext, you will manufacture them. And if you don't agree to go to war, if you don't agree to follow the system, eventually politicians can be disposed of, if you remember how it goes. They're not against this. So the old guys, well, I wasn't born, of course, no one was born at the time. You remember how you can manufacture reasons to go to war out of nothing somewhere. I come from a country, and I was a kid when in Italy. I remember my grandmother being very scared of Brigate Rosse, the far left terrorists of the 1970s in Italy, but there was also in Germany, in France, and I don't know if you had some in Norway. Now we know that it wasn't. Well, of course, there were young leftists, as usual. They were idiots. But on top of them was manipulated by the CIA and by the secret services of Italy. And it was the same week, there was a lot of terrorist attacks. And so we have to be very careful, because now we know, for example, the invasion of, this was Operation, there was Mongoose and there was another one, forgot. Gladio was in Europe. But the idea that we will do some terrorist attacks on our soil to justify war against an enemy. This is something that is been happening, and it's interesting to see the leaders of ISIS meeting with American leaders and having armies coming up from nowhere with brand new equipment, new cars. It's very, very fishy. So we are moving to this war, and you have potential war with the crazy people being indoctrinated to the war against us. But we are also getting ready, we as the West, of course, not Switzerland. But Norway is part of NATO, be careful, to go to fight Russia. But of course, you know, if you put yourself in the Russian position, you see all these countries around you that are starting to have bases, and NATO and American bases and so on. But Russia is not Iraq, and China is an ally now of Russia, a very strong ally. They have more and more business partnerships and machinery exchanges and now energy. And this is not going to be something easy. But we have to be careful, because obviously this is a problem. So this is old slide, of course, with the faces have changed, but the masters remain the same. The question is always, if you believe that politicians will take care of these problems and, you know, solve it, my opinion is that we're a bit naive to think that, right? I don't think we should have much faith in the system of today, of the political system, to take us out of this, because most of them are interested about corruption. They are manipulated by bigger players, and in the end by hidden players that we don't really know of. It also has this bad trend of becoming extremely bureaucratic. Any system becomes very bureaucratic, it grows, therefore it taxes more and more, it has more and more rules and regulations, and in the end it costs so much that it collapses under its own weight. No wonder that so many countries want to leave. But in the end, this is just a sub-level. You really have to understand where the elites and where sometimes the good critic that sometimes leftists have of this system, and probably leftists agree on this. They say, sure, it's domination by multinationals. It's not really. Multinationals are one layer of domination, but it really goes more layers than that. So, if you think, for example, of the consolidation of wealth, today we have, I was writing an article about this a few years back. I was looking at a little bit who controls companies across the world. Very quickly you come down to a few hedge funds that control most of the markets, to which you must add the pension funds of the biggest companies in the US. And who controls these biggest funds? In the end, you have maybe 6,000 people across the world which are in each other's board of administration, and therefore you have a very small group of people on which you can add one or two politicians, but not so many, that control the whole financial system in the world. And indeed, some of them are extremely rich, you know, the consolidation of the media, and then they say, oh, it's capitalism. No, it's not. It's something else. We are in a post-capitalistic world. We are not having capitalistic rules at all. It's a sort of weird hybrid between socialism for the very, 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 very rich and corporatism, where a few companies and their owners control not only the business, but the ideology, the transformation of how our psyche, how our brain works, through many, many ways, through advertising, through consumption, through trends, through fashions, through everything. They control and they can manipulate, and therefore the consolidation of money, of let's say 30% of the world wealth is owned by 0.0001% of the people. So that's a consequence. I'm not saying it's good or bad. You know, if you're discovering a fantastic product or medicine and you sell it and you become very, very rich, no problem. But the problem is the people, how they feel. And I can tell you, I'm not some guy from the left at all. I really like, people who make money. There's no problem with that. But I recognize that if you put pressure in a system, eventually that pressure needs a valve, and usually it's war. But if it doesn't happen, because maybe people don't really want it, it will eventually explode. And this is not new. 10 years ago, there was, the Occupy Wall Street and the movement of the 1%. and we start to have, you know, the left approach and the right, and you have everyone is upset today. Everyone feels this resentment in the Nietzschean sense against this system. You remember Greece for the last 10 years. They've had turmoil, they've had enslavement. They had to sell the harbors, the airports, the infrastructure, and the crisis is not done. They still have a lot of debt. And right now, today, I don't know what is the result today, but there is this incredible spontaneous movement in France that I think is really revolutionary. And it's a symptom. It's something that was inevitable. Sooner or later, this will start more and more in much more countries. And of course, the result is more and more police state and more dictatorship, which is odd because, you know, remember in the 90s, George W. Bush was saying to us that they hate us because we're free. Well, we're not so free. So it's really a trend that is dangerous, and any one of us is starting to realize that we live in a world that is in a propaganda point of view, like Orwell's 1984. Everything has been turned. You know, degeneracy is good, is actually moral. War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. He was a genius, George Orwell. Of course, he knew how it worked because he was part of he could see it from first hand when he was in Spain in the last 30s. And so this is another reason why, you know, the people who want to move to our lands, they are encouraged by our elites. And for many years I was wondering, what is the advantage for them to bring people who actually sometimes hate them even more? But in fact, they have a reason. Because this is the new police system. Because they are squeezing us in between, we have to work, otherwise we lose our jobs and we move to the areas of the city where the new guys are coming. And so we will suffer, our daughters will be raped, we will be beaten. So we have to enslave, we have to work. Otherwise we lose our jobs and we will end up with the new people coming in. And there's more and more, and more and more. Billions of them wanting to come. And this is why the United Nations want that. And of course, the number of refugees is going up. And again, if it was really families and if it was really real refugees, okay, there is a logic. But they know that it's military-age young men. It's an invasion. We have to be clear about this. And there is a reason why it's an invasion. It's because they want to enslave us. And they will use these people to replace us and to enslave us. I don't have nothing against the guys individually. They do what they have to do. Like, we will do what we need to do. But the reason why it's manufactured is, for me, because of the setting up of slavery. And of course, it brings a lot of problems that we all know about. So I'm not going to dwell into all of that. So, my point is, we are going to have a set of big problems. And the question then is, what do we do about it? Because we're not exactly, especially in Europe, we're not people who just say, okay, maktub, inshallah, we will see what happens, doesn't matter. No, we're people who act, we're people who want to do it. And I think there's going to be three ways that people generally will act. One way is to say, okay, no fear, quiet, no problem, zen. I don't believe that people are going to react like that. One way is to say, oh, I'm scared and I'm peeing my pants, and I think a lot of people are already in this mode. And this is why they submit, this is why they are cut, because they are scared. And sometimes it's not conscious, it's subconscious. They feel that something is going wrong and it's not going well. We're going to talk about Norway. You are a bit in a special situation like in Switzerland. And there is another way that you can react, which is not the nice way. And I don't know what is the percentage of people. But what I can see from, if I look in the streets, and I'm a guy who likes to observe and read and go in the streets and look at the people. I'm not just intellectually reading books. I also like to talk with the taxi driver. That's why I was late today. He didn't know the land. He didn't know the road. and so on and so on. You talk with people and you start to realize that, first of all, we're not citizens, we're consumers. We are manufactured to be stupid. Not too stupid, because then we cannot run the economy, but stupid enough so that we don't contest and we don't challenge authority and the orders. And this starts at school, obviously. The public school makes us like that. Television has been, for my generation for sure, an incredible propaganda machine and formatting machine. For a younger generation now, it's more internet, so it's more difficult to manage. This is why they're censoring so many people on the internet. And the new gods have been the companies, the consumers. And of course, we're all like this. Everyone here, and myself included, of course we consume to pretend and to show off. And of course. And we have to be conscious about this. And it's very difficult. We know all about that. And people customize their cars, which is meaningless, and so on. And I always joke about, because I like zombie movies, and I always joke about, it's an old joke now, but you know, that we don't need to wait for the zombie apocalypse. We already have it. If you look in the streets, people are like this all the time. In Geneva, it's a country where you have 0 accidents, but since we have smartphones, people get slammed by the tramway and the bus. Once per month, you have a dead guy because like this. Of course, we're already dead. And think about the Black Friday, which I'm sure you have already, of course, here. You know, I cannot stop by noticing that it looks really the same. You know, the way, the attitude of people is for me extremely disappointing. But of course, we have been manufactured this way. We have been pushed to go to these levels of destruction. And you add to this the surveillance state that is setting up, and the fact that we live more and more into boxes, and we travel into boxes, and we work into boxes or cubicles. And it's depressing. And also, you know, in the old days, you manufacture a table because you know how to work wood. It's your table. You made it. You manufacture a car. It's your car. Now it's robots who do it. So what do we do? Most of us, we are on Excel spreadsheets and yes, sir, and you do your thing, your trades and whatever. And you go home and what have you done today? I don't know. I just processed stuff and I accelerated the movement of stuff in services, and you don't know what you've done. So it's very disappointing. You know, when in the old days when they were manufacturing ships, or you go fishing, you come back and you say, this is the ship I built, this is the fish I caught. Now, I don't know. And of course we do everything on debt. So it's crap. And we eat shit. And we eat bad food more and more, and we get unhealthy, and we get ill, and we get sick from our consumption and our food. And the God is that. You consume, do everything. I mean, this movie was fantastic. Remember? They Live? Amazing movie. John Carpenter. So this is why in the West, and more across the world, I can tell you, this is not just us, or what I've said. It's also the Middle East. It's also more and more in Africa. People are trapped into this system, into this model. And this is why a lot of people are depressed. A lot of people are antidepressant. They are suicidal in many cases. And this is not a symptom of what I believe a system that has failed and is failing and is collapsing. Now, once again, don't believe me. You know, have your opinion, check it out, check your data, talk with people. You will see how depressed people are. Now, the good news, there are good news today. Oh yeah, no, I'm not finished. There's one chapter more. Yeah, the consequence of a system that is collapsing is that the flows of food, of supplies, of water, of electricity, which today are very, very complex, may not work so well in a system that is collapsing. Because everything is manufactured to be working seamlessly, perfectly, with zero inventory. So once you start to destroy that system, well, you start to have problems of inventory, problem of supply, maybe water that is not clean in your tap, or maybe there's no water in your tap anymore. And we know this because we have seen collapses of countries, and we have seen what strikes. This was in Belgium 3 years ago, when suddenly you have trucks stopping the cities, and then very, very quickly you have no more water, no more food, no more. And so, for sure they still have tap water, but there was no bottled water in the markets, and very quickly. And so then you have to negotiate. That wasn't the point of the model. When there's earthquakes, this was in Chile, but it's something that you see in other places, where very, very quickly people go to, like Katrina, the hurricanes in America, or Sandy in 2011, people quickly run to the supermarkets and they grab food because, the instinct tells you, oh shit, my house is empty, I need food, I need water. And there is this trend of people who are not prepared to go and hoard a lot of stuff quickly. And of course, the least smart people among us, they go and loot electronic equipment and fashionable shoes. Okay, but still it's a trend. It still is a trend. And if that trend goes on more than 2-3 weeks, then the problem is the public facilities or public utilities starts to shut down. Imagine a strong crisis when people don't go to work anymore because they can't or they don't want to. Certainly not in Norway, but in some countries you have no-go zones, and if this no-go zone starts to pillage and burn stuff around, well, maybe the engineer doesn't go to the nuclear plant, and the nuclear plant has to be shut down. Maybe the doctors cannot go to work at the hospital because it's dangerous to go, and they don't go. So at some point, in some areas, you have shut down. This was in America. And then you start to have people trying to be managed, and ill people and old people from the homes and so on that need to be managed. This was during Katrina in the dome. And eventually, if things stop, so that the crisis is too big, then you have utilities who needs to be shut down because you cannot manage the problems of, I'm sure you have had this in Norway, when snow cuts down some electric lines, suddenly you have areas of the land which have no electricity for a few weeks and so on. But it's a problem. And you are used, I know in Switzerland we are used to that in the mountain, but a lot of places in the country, they're not used, in other countries, they're not used to that. So once you start to be in the dark, it's over. Civilization, the way we know it, stops. And then you're in another world. Now, I'm not saying we're moving to Mad Max. This is not what I'm saying. We're not going to that level of problems. Maybe, but I don't think so. The good news, that's what I wanted to say, the good news is we can study past civilizations that have collapsed, because collapse is very common. Most civilizations died in the history of the world. Not so far away from us and not so far away in time. We can study how the Eastern Island, that was also mentioned in the Kon-Tiki Museum, by the way, how the Eastern Island civilization, which was very small, very localized, collapsed. We can study how the Mayas collapsed. Very interesting. Lack of resources, war, contraction of the population, and then lost cities in the jungle. Fascinating. We can study Rome. Part of my ancestors are from there, obviously. We can study Rome. I bring my children to Rome every time they get 8 years old. I bring them to Rome. So I've done 3 already, 1 more to go. And I explain to them, look how great this was. They have running water. They have flushing toilets. They have baths and sauna and see, the Turkish bath, in fact, is a Roman bath, and so on and so on. And it was great. It was gone. Well, they had part of our ancestors were Goths. So they brought the Goths as refugees in, and 80 years later they sacked the city. Yeah. So, but Goths were nice. Okay, and very near to us, the Soviet Union in 1991 when it collapsed. And we still remember that. How poor they became. They had to prostitute. They had mafia. They had crazy problems in Russia. So you can summarize that when the boundaries of a system, of an economical system, starts to have fluctuation within it that go beyond the boundaries because of the ecology, because of the population problems, you have a time of crisis. And there's 2 ways to get out of crisis. You reorganize in a better way, and usually it requires more energy, and you get to a higher level of complexity. This is what we've done in the past. Or if you don't have energy, or because you are too heterogeneous and too messed up to reorganize, you fall down to a simpler level of organization, but then you have much less population. That's the rule. You cannot have more people in chaos. You can have more people, more organized, but you can have less people and more chaos. Hey, chaos can be fun. We used to live in small communities without delivery from eBay, without Starbucks coffees, without the car, and it was okay. We traveled across the world with sail ships. It's not impossible to live without oil. It's not impossible to live like we lived 200 years ago. Okay, then you suffer more when you have a tooth problem. You suffer more when you have a... But maybe we cannot lose medicine. Maybe we can try to keep the system working enough so that we can still have anesthetics, right? Because our world has some great stuff. Flushing toilets, anesthetics, sometimes medicine. Not all, but some good medicine we have. So what we can predict for sure, if we're logical, is that we are moving into a world with much more poverty, much more chaos, much more people living like they live in the third world. First of all, we're importing the third world to us, but we're also going to decrease our complexity to more chaotic times. The heterogeneous nature of the big cities of the whole world today leads to, multiculturalism means multi-conflicts. It has always been the same, always been the case. And you need an enormous amount of subvention and money to keep that going. And we've seen it in Paris, in London, in Stockholm, in Malmo, in Norway, that was London, in America, all the time. Whenever there is a problem, it just burns up. And this is starting to come to sizes that are very big, and it's all over the world. This was in Latin America. And multiculturalism eventually looks like this. And this is really not the kind of future we want for our children. But it's a reality. So who's ready for this? The gangs are ready. The mafia, I know many in Italy, how they think and how they work. But in Latin America as well, they're used to chaos. They're used to no rule of law. They're ready. And so it means that a lot of what you see during the times of crisis is that local gangs take over a lot of areas in the cities. Because they have usually ethnic unity, sometimes religious unity, but also because they have a lifetime of working together in violence. So they are ready to use violence. And when you use violence and people are not used to violence, they submit very fast. So what you also see is starting to see militias. This was in Yugoslavia. In fact, I know a guy in a conference who said, "Hey, that's my uncle." But we've seen this in Yugoslavia. Suddenly people create militias. They protect the land, they protect the village, they protect the land. This was in Albania, next to Kosovo. And eventually you have partition. Eventually, when you have too much conflict, the country splits, or the people move. It was the case in 47 between India and Pakistan, where basically millions of Muslim Indians moved to Pakistan, and millions of Indians who were Hindi, who were living in Pakistan, moved to India. And it was hundreds of thousands of deaths. I think it was more than 1 million people died over that trend. We've seen in Asia the same trend. We've seen in Yugoslavia the same trend. I've seen it in Africa, when suddenly a region starts to fight, populations separate. And it's extremely brutal sometimes, and people lose everything. They move with nothing. And we know what it is. We can study history. This was in Russia in the 90s, in Lebanon. It is not fantasy, it's not fiction. It is something that has existed and is existing, and there's no reason why it is. And what I hope for us is that there is one thing we have to avoid at all costs, is that we lose our lands and we end up refugees. Because refugee, you have nothing. So if those who can sell their bodies usually, and we don't want that for our wives and daughters. And of course, it's ultra-violent. And we're used to that in Europe. By the way, our history is horrible if you think of the 30 Years' War in Germany. I think Sweden participated. I don't know about Denmark. But it's half of the population who got killed in 30 years. Half. Just as the plague 2 centuries before. Half of the population killed. And killed in horrible ways. Horrible ways. Recently, when the Soviet systems, as was expected, took over in Russia, they killed millions and millions of people through starving, through forced massacres and things like that. And usually on top of all this, every time there is big war that lasts for a long time, you have illnesses that comes in. And that's the real killer, by the way. It's the illnesses that kill most of the people. So, you know, the future, I think, is a bit grim. So, the question is, what are we going to do, you, me, in this room? Not the most of the people we cannot change, but you and I, what we can change. First of all is to decide, do you want to survive about this or not? Otherwise, you can jump in the water and swim until it's over. But we have to decide. And the reality is that we follow emotionally the Kubler-Ross levels of curve. First of all, you're in shock, in denial. I presume, you're probably not in shock. If you're here, it's that because you suspected something like that. The next level, and a lot of us are still in this phase, is anger. It's the fault of these guys, I'm angry. Why? They made our world, which was so great, it's becoming like this. We hate them. Angry. And then you start to negotiate. Well, and I'm still probably in a little bit in that as well. Well, maybe I can still have one foot in the modern world, and one foot I'm trying to plan something else, and okay, maybe it's not going to be that bad, or maybe if I move to Argentina, it's going to be safe, or maybe if I move to New Zealand, it's okay, and there's no leftists there. Who knows? We can negotiate. This is the bargaining part. And then there's depression, and people say, "Oh, this is the black pill. There's no chance. We're all going to die. I am full depressed. There's nothing we can do. This is not helping." But it's a phase. It's a phase that is understandable. And then you start to say, okay, maybe the world is going to change. Maybe there's going to be problems. But goddamn, I'm going to do something about it. And this is where some people are idealistic. The young people, they want to change the world. They say, let's go and manifest and no to global change, global warming, no to this, no to that. No, we want to change. You're not going to change anything. It's too late. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. Yeah, maybe do politics, try. But you will see it's really tough. Because you have everything against you. Because you're touching the growth, economy, money for the elites. And you're saying it's going to collapse. And therefore, even if they understand it's collapsing, they say, shut up. Because if everyone thinks it's collapsing, no one spends money and then it collapses for sure. So you have this problem. Sometimes people say, but what you're saying is going to help the collapse. Say, yeah, but I only sell 200,000 books. It's not a lot. I'm not like Katie Rowling with 800 million books sold. Yeah, I wish I can help the collapse, but I'm really a small writer. But you need to accept that. And this is where it comes from. My humble opinion and idea, which I submit to you in my books, one of which is here about how women, so it's a good book for Christmas for your mothers, sisters, and daughters. It is concept of sustainable autonomous space. The idea is that you need to be autonomous. The more you're autonomous, the less you're dependent on the system. Therefore, if the system crashes or when it crashes, the less you're impactful. Very simple idea. Sustainable is because you don't know how long it's going to last. Is it going to be 2 weeks, 2 years, 200 years, or forever, that you are going down to a level that it's not anymore like you have today. So you don't have any more electricity, running water. So you need to be autonomous and plan for long term. You try what you do. Not everyone can have this fantastic autonomous farm. And you start small. You start where you can. But you start, you do. And a base, because you cannot be a nomad. You cannot be traveling from one place to another and be autonomous and be sustainable. Nomads usually they either come to a place, steal and go away, or they're parasites. It's the way it is since the dawn of time. You need to base yourself. You need a base, you need to have roots. And so that's what I say to people who tell me, what do you think of moving to Thailand? Or I say, where are your roots? What's your ancestry? Where do you feel at home? You feel at home in Thailand? Because they will sure consider you as a stranger. And today you have money, it's okay. So they will consider you, today they treat you like a king because you spend money. But once money has no value anymore, your whole world is a different place, maybe not, but if it does, you think they're going to treat you well? Because you're a stinking foreigner for them. I never thought of it like that. Well, what do you think about foreigners in your country? Are you going to help them? Okay, so people start to think. So I believe it's better to stay where you feel with your roots, where you have connections. So, in Norway, you still have that. You still have your traditions, you still have your houses, you still have and you have a big country and a small population. So you have a lot of advantages. It's very simple for you to take your grandmother's house or your old family house and start to work on it to make it a place where you can be in case of big collapse. Okay? So I prefer the country areas because of the obvious things that you will see later. You can try to work in your suburban houses, and of course in the big buildings, it's going to be much more difficult, of course, to be autonomous and sustainable in such places. I know some guys, this is a guy in France, that's where he lives. Okay, it's not glamorous, he's probably not going to date a lot of supermodels, for sure, but after a while, who cares? But, you know, he has no money, so he took the place, he brought an old caravan, and he's growing his food and doing his stuff. So I'm just telling you, the range of possibility is very wide, because people say, oh, your farm in Switzerland is very expensive, for sure, I cannot have all this money. I say, wait. The range of what you can do can be starting very small. You don't need a lot of money to start to be autonomous. I know some people who have the boat, and they say, well, in case of problems, I have the boat, and I can... Okay, it's another way to think of it. I don't believe it's the best, but to succeed, you need 7 elements. First one is water, because we need water. So think of places, this is where I live, we have fountain, many fountains, and water is common in the mountain in Switzerland. This year was a bit short, but we had water. So think about where you can have access to water, how you can purify, you can make it clean, how you can make it for your house, maybe storage of water in your house. So I think that in Norway you have the same advantage than we have in Switzerland. Water is not a problem. You have the sea, you have a lot of rain, you have a lot of mountains, you're not many. So water is usually not in the past a problem. Maybe the ice, but water is good for you. Second element is food. Healthy food all year round, that you can grow, whether it's more and more in the cities or in fields. Now, of course, your grandparents knew all this. Of course, they would have said, of course we need water, of course we need food, and we need to store it for the winter. Because they knew that it was hard, and you have a culture, like we have in the mountains in Switzerland, of fucking hard winters and long winters. And you starve in May, June, because you still haven't grown anything. And if you haven't prepared, if you don't have stored salted fish, salted food in the pickles and so on, in the jars and everything, you die. So you have a culture of that. You have a culture of setting aside the food and so on. And of course, growing it as efficiently as you can in the summer and the fall. So yes, think about it. Think about using as much, not necessarily all technologies, but technologies that can work in any scenario. And of course, that's where I live in Switzerland, where we are working in the garden to make, of course, the little garden. I mean, it's very difficult. It's some years it's really hard. So little by little we grow our stuff, and yeah, it's fun. But now we can learn. And for example, this year was a disaster. My garden was horrible. But I haven't starved. I've lost a little. I haven't starved. but that's because we have the supermarket. But if there was no supermarket, we would have been in trouble. And of course, you need to work with what you have. So you have the field, you have the fish, you have a lot of stuff. Okay. The third point is hygiene and health. You need to be as healthy as possible. And of course, this starts immediately. That means, of course, thinking about how you keep good hygiene, because this is a really good thing that we learned in Europe in the last century. It's like you actually live better if you wash your hands than before. Because in the Middle Ages, I think we've had a period where we lost a bit of that. And of course, keeping your hygiene for everything very, very clean, and be careful not to eat where you shit. That's the fundamental rule, or where your animals shit. And of course, healthy food, and I would remove the bread now, of course. But and exercise and keep healthy and learn from a very young age how to really be good in your mind, good health in your mind, good health in your body. And this is something we all need to start all the time. And whatever happens, this is good, by the way. Whatever happens, this is good for us. And of course, it means that we need to learn how to treat as much naturally as possible the kind of illnesses and problems that we have. Fourth level is energy. How you keep as much energy, as much supplies for your farms, for your house, for your needs as possible. So yes, we have renewables, but before that, save on how much you consume. Let's reduce the levels of, so in my farm, of course, I put solar panels for electricity with batteries and everything so I can be self-sufficient. But really the first step is let's consume less. We don't need to have all the lights open all the time. We don't need to have a very complex machinery running. You know, remember in the houses of the 1950s or 60s, in one room there is one socket of electricity. Today, when they build new houses, you have 20 because people need to plug in so many things. So we have to think maybe we're over-consuming on that as well. And of course, store your batteries, your lamps, and so on. Maybe, I know some people, this is the equipment of some guy I know, not too far from where we live, who's producing his biodiesel. He's taking oil from a restaurant and stuff like that, filtering it, having a process of esterification, and getting out biodiesel from it. So you can be autonomous. I mean, you have a lot of stuff here. You have a lot of things that you can help, because clearly the coal is a problem in our country. So yes, get the wood, and eventually go back, if needed, to old technology. But it's old technology that is reliable and works. So that you can do. Level number 5, is knowledge. Knowledge is very important. We don't want to just save physically ourselves. We also want to keep part of the great traditions of our culture, of our art. So, store in your house good books and read them. Philosophy, history, traditions from our lands, maybe also traditions from other lands, because it's interesting to know how the world works. I'm a lover of the world. I'm a real multiculturalist. I love every culture on their own, in their places, in their countries, and I love about listening to them, but I love mine more. Simple. Learn jobs that are real, that are useful all the time. So if you want to study lawyer, sure, do it. But at the same time, learn to work with your hands, learn to build stuff, learn to repair stuff. This is something that is important. So yeah, try to keep the things traditional. Point number 6, the defense. You're only free and you only own what you can defend. So today, yeah, sure, there's the police, there is that is not working and so on. But today you can say, I call the police. And I'm sure that in Norway the police will come very fast to you if you have a problem and so on. But in some places, like for example in America, the average time for police to come is something like 6 minutes. So if you have burglars or if they want to rape you or kill you, 6 minutes is super long. So learn to defend yourself, because first is martial arts, for sure. Because once you discover that you can manage your body and control your body against something else, against someone else, or an animal, or a dog, well, your brain starts to change. I'm sure everyone here who does martial arts, they realize that they become more free, they become more self-confident. Not because you're more aggressive, in fact, you're less aggressive when you do martial arts. But you suddenly discover, oh, I can do this. So if someone comes and says, and insults you, you know you can destroy him. Or maybe you can try, or suddenly you know that it's going to be a very complicated thing. And after all, who cares if they insult you? That's not so important. So maybe you avoid conflict. So that's one step. And if conflict does happen, you have more chances to survive if you're good with your body than if you're not. So that's important. Of course, learning to use all the tools that are available. And I come from a Swiss culture that is, generally speaking, not everyone, but generally speaking, is a culture that is very okay with using guns, for example. For defense, we're not talking about being aggressive. I'm sure in Norway you have a culture as well because of the mountains and people hunting and so on. And I always take the example of Luke, so not this one, but the other one. And in the Bible it says that, Jesus said at some point that he who has no clothes should sell his clothes to buy a gun, well, a sword, but at the time it was the same. So in fact, it's true that if you're not able to defend yourself, you're nothing. You're just a potential slave or a victim. And you don't want to be a victim. So learn to defend yourself. It starts with your mind, it starts with your hands and body, and with technology later. And remember that who's doing mass killing and mass genocide is not people with guns. It's the government. Government armed against people who are not armed is the reason why you have genocide. And I'm 100% convinced, and maybe I'm paranoid, that the day we have no weapons, we have disarmed as people, the day we revolt, we are starved, we're killed. And all of this is all over the world done by government. Mostly leftists. Slavery, all that. The history is full of disasters, of government with guns, killing civilians with no guns. I can go on and on, of course. So again, Orwell said that, the symbol of freedom is to have a gun in your house, to make it short. Okay. And this is happening all over the world. You have in northern Iraq, the Kurdish, in Afghanistan, of course people organize in militias. So it's not just about being Europe, because people say, oh, what can you do on your own? Well, you're not on your own. You have your neighbors, you have the people around you, you have people from your tribe. You group yourself, and eventually you train together. And that leads to the seventh point, which is probably the most important, is you need to have the social link. You have to build the link with the people around you, your families, your tribe, your friends. And the idea of the sustainable autonomous base is not just your house in the mountain or in the fields. It's the village. You are element of the new village. And you have this in Norway. Everyone still talks about the traditions of being in the fishing villages or the farms, when you know your neighbors and you're very independent as a people. I can feel that. But at the same time, you still know how to connect with people and how to help each other if needed. So this is important. Sometimes you need a strong liver. I agree. But so it's funny because I looked at traditional Norwegian family on Google, and that was the image I got. And I don't know why. I don't think it's true, but that's what I got. I'll finish it then. I'll take questions later. So I found another picture of a traditional Norwegian family. They look good. Maybe there's a future. Maybe you can convince them to take charge of the country the way it should. So yeah, good food, good traditions, helping people. Yeah, and take your family, pick your family before. And again, the choice is yours. That's something I say in my books. And this means that we can go back to the family life, to the village life. It's very important to rediscover what it was. And once again, think about it. Nature is fragile when you have organized, ordered, optimized, homogeneous, inflexible systems. And the nature is very strong when it's fractal, resilient, and adaptable. We have to be anti-fragile. We have to be strong. Okay. So it means that perhaps in the future we will have smaller countries, smaller groups. And I believe very much in this. We need to have more simple life. Because sometimes we're overwhelmed, and I have the same. We're overwhelmed by too much stuff. Too much material stuff, too much things to do. Have simple life. Your children, your family, your sustainability. Make it simple. I'm not the guy who has the simplest life, but it's something we need to aim. And one thing I ask you to do, not the same way as I do, but metaphorically you do this the same. And I don't ask you necessarily to do it with a hammer, but get rid of your TV. I'm sure all of us already have it, but I can tell you many years ago this was controversial. So get rid of your television. Start to exercise. Start with simplicity. Maybe if you have some money on the side and you don't know what to do with it, get some gold. That's not a problem. And analyze and be ready for things that happen. Because once again, the future, it's already here. If you open your eyes, this is in Poland. It's already happening. Collapses have happened. This was probably in the 90s. We already seen and disasters happen. Hurricane Sandy in New York and so on. So the choice is, whoa, too fast. The choice is, and once again, you can choose to do nothing. That's fine. You will still be entertained and fed by the system until the system is alive. On the other extreme, some people are completely into this and maybe it's extreme as well. Be perhaps close to your land and remember that, difficult times make strong people. And it's the strong people who create better worlds. And the better worlds make weak people, which create chaos and therefore create difficult times. So this cycle is not new, but we're clearly in the Ragnarok, in the Kali Yuga. We are there. So we need to be, and those who will not be will disappear and there will be natural selection. But we need to be the strong people, the people who keep in, and eventually we have to have hope. We have to have hope that the world that is going to happen after us or because of us is going to be a better one and is going to be a healthy one for you, for me, for our children, for the next generation. So this is what I hope. And thank you very much. And if you have questions, I'd be happy to answer. I was too long, as usual, I'm sure. Do you have any questions, perhaps? Sure.
So, is there, so you have increase complexity and evolve, and you have simplify, and essentially decentralize. So I'm kind of thinking, are we at the moment having an opportunity of making technology that will allow us to be at a higher level, but in a sustainable way? You have people today being able to produce machine parts and so on out of their backyard. And even further, you may have this hero of a guy with a soldering iron who can even create small microcomputers at home. I've seen oftentimes this perspective of the future that we essentially go through a new middle age, and it's a kind of reversion.
Yeah.
What does it look like when you do a bit of both? That you decentralize and simplify with technology?
So first of all, a short answer is to say I don't know, because I'm not a prophet. I don't know the future. If I knew, I would make a lot of money on the stock market. But I don't know. So that is a simple question, the simple answer to your question. The second thing on your really excellent question is that I actually believe that there are a lot of solutions. A lot of them are technological, a lot of them are psychological. But on the technological ones, yes, we can do a lot of things. There is one trap, however. One trap is to say we can find solutions in technology as a deus ex machina or a god that will save us all. This is the trap. So yes, absolutely agree, and I'm not an expert on that. I'm sure there is a ton load of technologies that exist. In my farm, for example, there's an interesting one where you put batteries that charge electricity, and with one switch you're on the grid, and one switch you're not on the grid. Okay, that's interesting. That technology was not available 10 years ago, not like this. You have, I know, for example, in Switzerland, there is a few places where they start to put water reservoirs on top of the hill or the mountain and empty ones below. They have a tube and they have a turbine and solar panels. So when they need electricity during the night or during the dark hours, like now, like in the afternoon, They get the water down, turbine flows, they generate electricity in the day when there is light. The solar panel pumps up the water to the upper reservoir again. So you have this kind of combination, solar and water. You have a lot of stuff. You have hydro turbines in the water, in the rivers of the mountains. You have a lot of possibilities. You have possibilities of manufacturing again, which leads you to the point of that you only have 24 hours in the day, and you cannot be a specialist of everything, which leads to the very old human discussion about specialization. How much a society needs to have specialized people to do bicycle repair, smelting iron and building tools, and others to manufacture shoes or whatever. This is a very old, thousands of year old technology dilemma. Is if you want to do everything, you can't, because it's too much. You cannot be an expert of everything. You need specialization, and to have specialization, you need a group that is big enough to support that. And yes, technology today can help us to do a lot of things. For example, in the 3D printing, there is some interesting ideas, but then how do you get the raw materials for your 3D printing? Do you store them? How much do you have? Who's going to produce? And of course, the more you think about the number of people needed to recreate a society, the more you need a community that is big. And then you need more people to accept that this kind of future is possible. And then it's not simple, it's not easy. So it's a dilemma, which is a very interesting one. And this is where a lot of people start to think more, I'm going to convince my town mayor, my area, my city to do that instead of just myself. And I agree, if you only do it yourself, you will have good results, but it's only you. Eventually you need to convince more people. I personally have had, I would say, bad experience trying to convince let's say political organizations or state organization, even at local level, because eventually you quickly go into topics that are taboo. You know, the ones, immigration and so on. So basically, quickly, all the media and the apparatus shoots on you. Okay, that's the risk to take, but it's not enjoyable, as maybe you know here in Norway. So obviously, there is the risk. So you have to start small. But to come back to your question, because I'm already moving elsewhere. Yes, you can and you should.
Just a small follow-up. One idea is to take some inspiration, since we're in Norway, from Viking Age, when a small farm area needed to have the people required to fix and fill a ship. You need people to do the repairs of the ship, to set up camp when they reach their destination. You need actually quite an advanced structure to maintain the ship and go abroad. And I think that when you create groups, you should take a similar strategy in making sure that you have the right elements, even in from an organizational perspective. That also makes you better suited to essentially have greater organizational skills if you want to expand the group and create a micro-society.
Of course, absolutely agree. And of course, two things. First of all, yes, and I saw yesterday at the Fram Museum, how they organized the polar expedition, Amundsen and so on. Very interesting. Of course, how you think you have to think ahead for 6 months in how you pack the crates, the dogs, and how you feed the dog. This kind of organization, we as Europeans, we're very good at that. We are incredibly good, anxious people to plan ahead and to think, 3 years from now, the winter, we'll need to buy a new thing to make we're crazy and great for this. Of course, we have ulcers. In Africa, they don't have ulcers because they don't care about the future. There's no anxiety because who cares? But they have other advantages. Every country and culture has that thing. So I agree with you. We should and organize. But the trap again is if you try to build too big with too many people, you could get disappointed and you could have problems. So start with you for sure. Tell about other people. Start with your friends, your family, the people from your school, from your whatever. And little by little grow. What's important is to go little steps, because if you aim too big, too fast, you get disappointed at some point. If you see what I mean. It's like in business. If you say, this is my business plan, I want to be the next IBM, I want to be the next Norsk Hydro. Okay, it's going to take a long time and a lot of buying. But, so you start with a step. I'm going to build a computer and sell my software to a small target. It works, this target, and then it grows and it grows. It's like everything. You have to go with the steps that are manageable by your ability and by your network. And it's a very good question, because this is the hardest thing of all of the people I know that are doing this. Is a lot of people can do their own autonomy. But as soon as you start to group with people, it's more difficult. It's more relationships start to come in and so on. So, and then they like your wife and you like their wives. It's complicated, you know how it is now. I'm joking, that's the Italian parts, that the Italian guy who speaks. But generally speaking, humans are complicated. And I'm a guy who likes to be alone. So I like to be in my own. So I have to push myself to go to people and so on.
I was thinking about the situation in France, and how optimistic are you that this could really be a new direction for France?
It's going to be a new direction, whatever happens, for sure, because they either go in revolution or they go in dictatorship now. It's binary. The question is that I think both wants the things to go back to the good days, but there's no good days around anymore. It's impossible. France has no more good days ahead. There's no way you go back to France of 1960. There is no way you go back to multiculturalism, happy multiculturalism, because it cannot exist. And there is no money. So everyone will be disappointed about this, and there's going to be, I don't know about what's happening today, but there's going to be worse and worse scenarios in the future. But people are upset. So when people are upset, they have to explode, and they will explode. And this is just a symptom that is predictable. I was not, very honestly, I was not expecting it now, at this moment. I was expecting it in the future. But Italy had the change through a vote and joined the very sound and sane countries of Hungary, Poland, Czech, and the East. But France today, and I think Spain in the future quickly, are going to explode. And when last time France exploded, it was millions of deaths in Europe, because Napoleon brought war everywhere. So I don't think there's a Napoleon in France. That's the good news. But they're going to, there's a potential for incredible violence in France. And England too, but in a different way. But we'll see. Miss, you have it.
Yes, from the things you said about the first thing that will happen is that people split up, and you might end up as a refugee from your own country if you do not unite. So to me, it seems like the most important thing is to focus on the racial aspect, make people understand that they're one people.
There's a Lebanese author, Amin Malouf, who wrote an incredibly good book about his experience in Lebanon, where the country split up and went into civil war in the 70s. It's called The Murderous Identities. I don't know if the book exists in English, but it was very interesting to say that all humans are linked with others that have the same identity as theirs. You call it a tribe, you call it something else, you call it a community. Some people still do that. Armenians, Jewish people, not all, but most. Foreigners who live in these countries, Somalis in Sweden or in Norway, they do connect with themselves. Race is obviously one of the elements that creates identity. It's not necessarily the only one. I know it's an important one, because we are 80% genetic. 80% of the way I am and think is because of my genes. And we have very little free thought. Our free will is very, very limited. In fact, we are who we are because of our ancestors. That's why we should not necessarily worship, but be grateful to our ancestors for who we are. But I'm educated. I'm bad for that. I'm educated in a world where multiculturalism is really good. It's wow, super, and where everyone is the same, everyone is equal, and so on and so on. So for me, it has been a very difficult psychological struggle in my mind to realize the reality that bites me in the ass every day, that we're not the same, we're not equal. And so I have to force myself to admit that yes, race is a very important element. And despite the fact that I live in Switzerland where people from all races are there, and usually we picked up the best from every country in the world. So I know people who are excellent, people who are from Algeria or from Ghana or from Eritrea, who are really good people. But I know that I'm seeing the exception, not that they're not good or not bad. Good and bad is not the word I wanted to use, but who are people who are so different that in case of crisis, it will become a problem. And I'm super lucky that I live in Switzerland, which is extremely quiet, whereas there is very little violence. This has nothing to do with Malmö or Paris or elsewhere. We have not the same problems because of the specifics of Switzerland, because of the specific decisions we took, and because we are a little bit less weak than other countries in terms of psychology. Because in Switzerland, people are yet, if I see two foreigners, well, me, I'm not a good example. I'm with Marcos, no one fucks with us in the street because of size. I mean, they will fuck with someone smaller, of course. And we have a lot of Portuguese, so they're smaller. They're great people, Portuguese, but they attract more pain than the tall guys. You see what I mean? But if people come to a normal Swiss guy, the Swiss guy is not going to say, oh, please don't hit me. That's not the way we think in Switzerland at this point. Maybe we're getting to the point of being, to be fragile. In France, it's like this until they explode. And now there's no way to see where it's going to stop. Follow up what's happening in France. It can be really wild. But you see what I mean? So I understand your question. And yes, we need to, it's when you travel, let's say, you go to Japan and wow, it's a fantastic country. And suddenly you see a guy who's European and you talk to him because he looks like you, of course. Or like, I know, in Africa, I've seen this in some countries where, because Africans it's a huge continent with different sub-ethnics which we don't recognize, but they do. And you have people from the same area of Africa in a business meeting, because of course they are businesses and so on. And they say, oh, you're from Ghana. Oh yes, I'm from Ghana. Oh, nice to see you. It's nice to see a foreigner here. And for you it's like, okay, they look the same. But no, they don't look the same, in fact. And I can see, and now I recognize, after many years in Africa, the other day, I could recognize a guy and say, oh, you're from North Cameroon. And say, oh, yeah, you know that. Yeah. And yeah, I like North Cameroon. There's serious guys and so on, compared to South Cameroon, and so on. And the guy was impressed, because I can tell that. But the reality is that North Cameroon don't go along with South Cameroon. It's not the same culture, not the same food. And that's the reality of the world. We are thousands and thousands of different tribes together. And look in Europe, we fought each other on like stupid guys for centuries and millennia. And I'm sure that you had people saying, oh, Norwegians and Swedes and Finns and Denmark. And for an Italian, you're all beautiful big blondes. It's fantastic. You're gods. And when you come here, they say, oh no, but the Swedes and I know in Germany, some guy from North Germany was telling me, people from South Germany, it's like the missing link between monkeys and humans. And you're like, Bavarians? Okay. I'm Italian, so what do you think about me? And I had this guy who used to work in Ivory Coast. He was saying, North Europeans don't like the South Europeans, which don't like the North Africans, we don't like the Middle African, and we don't like the people from Southern Africa. And I presume the people from Southern Africa, they don't like the penguins. And it's a bit funny, like it works like this. We all have these stereotypes and so on. So my education is the education of the old world that is dying, of we're all the same, we're all nice. But it's true. When I meet young people, this is gone. Teenagers today, they're very red-pilled on race, on things like that. Sometimes I feel too much. Sometimes it's like, because, the real racism is when you consider that all people from one group are the same. And it's not true. It's not true. But that's something I can say now when things are still super well. But when you remove food and electricity and running water, you don't think anymore like this. So people will revert, and I've seen it in Rwanda. People revert to you're a Tutsi, I kill you. And the guy says, well, I'm not really a Tutsi, I'm a quarter Tutsi, I still kill you. And the other side says, well, actually, I'm not Tutsi at all, I'm like you, yes, but you live with the Tutsi, so I kill you. So, and this is what Almin Malouf wrote in this book. He explained how Lebanon, you have these mixed cultures, and they all look the same, Arab, Christian, and yet they slaughtered each other. And Yugoslavia was a bit the same. Can you tell physically the difference between a Bosnian, a Croatian, and a Serb? I can't. It's very difficult. But they said, oh, you come from this village, therefore you're a Christian, we kill you. Or you come from this village, therefore you're an Orthodox, we kill you. Or from that village you're a Muslim. No, I'm just a tourist, we kill you nonetheless, because it's complicated when people get upset and angry. And this is something that people don't want to hear today. I'm still very cocked in a way. You see, I'm still thinking the way my education programmed me to think, oh, you know, respect, and you judge people as an individual, and yet I'm considered by the media like the very bad guy, because obviously I even touch these feelings, but I touch them much less than what is happening in the world when there is a crisis. And even mentioning these things it's taboo today. So, but it's less taboo for young people. So I see white, of course, young people, and the other ones I know, I don't need to see it, it's obvious, that are they start to group themselves on this. By reaction, look in France. If a white guy goes to a certain neighbor and gets beaten, well, then if he really has to go, he goes with his friends, and then next time he goes with 10 of his friends, and then 100 of his friends, and the next time he's going to bring guns, and then it's going to be civil war, and then there is separation, for sure. And in India and Pakistan, you've seen it even in movies and things like that. You have people who say, well, everyone loves me in this village. Actually, it's a true story. I'm not going to say a story from a movie. I'm going to tell you a true story. A guy from Kurdistan that I know, I was told the story. The guy is in a good village. He's Kurdish. The people are Arab. There's a split. And his neighbors say, you know, you're like my brother. I love you. We have had great time, but you have to leave now. Because tomorrow morning we come and we kill you. And we rape your women and daughters, and we burn your house. Yeah, but you're my friend. We've been friends since school time. We've always been together. Doesn't matter. You're Kurdish, we're Muslim. You get the fuck away. Or we Arab, in fact, and we get away. And in fact, they're both Muslim in reality. But still, it's the way it is. So, yeah, it's tragic, but it's nature.
You are talking about living together, being the same. It's for the elites. You don't see conflicts among the elite in the very closed area and things like that. But the integration and all the things, it's the price.
Your parents lived in Algeria.
Yes.
You told me that experience. They must have told you stories about one day everything was fine, and then civil war, and then you have to leave. You've lived that experience in your family. That's a very, as a French living in Algeria, that's a tragedy. And now, of course, you're Norwegian, but it's a tragedy. And the world is full of tragedies. History is just a sequence of tragedies and wars, and peace is just a small period between wars. Unfortunately, I wish it would be different. I wish I could survive without all these problems. But we've been lucky to live in the world where it was in a way safe, but it wasn't meant to be forever. And I realize that now, but again, you start with the phase of disbelief, anger, depression, and so on before you accept it. It's a psychological process that is important. Sorry.
Nigeria. You know about Nigeria?
Yeah, I've been there a few times, yes.
In about 6 to 10 years, they're going to be 1 billion people.
I don't know, 6 or 5 years, but they're on the path to big growth, yes.
Yeah.
They're 200 million already.
Yeah, they grow a lot.
Yeah.
They grow a lot. And what will happen if it breaks out civil war? What will happen?
Well, they already have civil war, which is from the north, and you have a pen? between the north and Muslim areas and the southern Christians. Someone has a pen. And also between in the south, they have people who have the oil, who say, hey, why the whole country is living on the oil that comes from my land? So you know the conflicts about, you took all your wealth from Africa. It's the same stories within Africa. Some areas who have the... What's the name of
Julia.
your wife? And it's terrible. With a J?
Yeah.
Italiana.
Si.
Really?
No.
No. It's funny.
The name, though.
Good. Just a second.
Just a smart distance.
So yeah, it's overpopulation is a problem. But as the deers in St. Matthew's, nature has a very efficient way to bring down population. It's called death.
With the Marrakesh deal now.
Oh yeah, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's about that.
We should fair that one.
Just a second. Ta-da. Obviously, I cannot write and speak at the same time.
Lucky for you, Switzerland is out of the market.
Today they announced they would not sign it yet.
Right, thank you very much.
Great.
Thanks for the interview.
Thanks a lot.
I'll send it later.
You know, the globalized world means globalized flows. So eventually it's only logical that they will say, well, if there's too many people in one country, we're going to bring them in countries where there are less people, because we have been told in the 70s, we are going to lack resources, which was true. And so you need to do less children, which is true. And we need to put women with feminism at work, which is why not? But then you have less children. Now they say, oh, you have less children, so you have to take millions of people from abroad. And I think the reasons are, of course, they want to enslave us and control us and put pressure on us. And as you said very rightfully, the elites, they don't care because they live in protected areas for the moment. And because now in Paris it's not a very protected area. And so there is this process of globalization. So the problem is very big, and we're not going to change it as individuals. We can voice, I think we should voice our upset about this. We have to say to our politicians, no, we have to put borders, we have to prevent this. I agree with that. But the process is very slow. One good news is that when the economy collapses, there is no more immigration. It's no more, it's finished. You don't, because who is moving to Zimbabwe today? No one, because it's poor. So the day we collapse, no one is moving here, and by the way, there probably will not be transport.